Afghanistan is not poor because it failed. It is unstable because it is too important. At the heart of Asia, Afghanistan sits at one of the most dangerous locations on Earth, not because of war, but because of connection. It lies at the crossroads between Iran, Central Asia, China, and the Indian subcontinent. For thousands of years, this land was not a borderland. It was a bridge. And bridges are never left alone. More than 4,000 years ago, long before modern borders or national identities existed, the valleys of Afghanistan were already supporting dense human settlement. Snowmelt from the Hindu Kush Mountains fed vast river systems, carving fertile corridors through an otherwise harsh and mountainous terrain. These valleys allowed agriculture, trade, and eventually urbanization to flourish. But geography is destiny, and Afghanistan's geography gave it too much destiny. To the north, the region known as Bactria connected Afghanistan to the nomadic cultures of Central Asia. To the southeast, it opened into the Indus Valley, one of the world's earliest great civilizations. From the west came Iranian peoples, languages, and political systems. From the east came Indian religious and cultural influence. Afghanistan did not produce a single dominant civilization of its own in antiquity. Instead, it absorbed many, and that absorption made it valuable. When the Medes, and later the Achaemenid Persian Empire, expanded eastward in the 7th century BCE, Afghanistan was not conquered for prestige. It was conquered because control of Afghanistan meant control of movement, of armies, of merchants, of ideas. By the time Alexander the Great arrived in the 4th century BCE, Persia had already reshaped the region. Persian language, administration, and religion were deeply rooted, yet Afghanistan resisted Alexander more fiercely than almost any other territory he encountered. This resistance was not accidental. Mountain warfare, fractured tribal authority, and deep local knowledge made conquest slow and costly. Alexander ultimately secured the region not only with force, but with marriage, wedding the Bactrian princess Roxana to stabilize local elite support. This pattern would repeat endlessly throughout Afghan history. Empires could conquer Afghanistan, but they could not hold it cheaply. After Alexander's death, his successors struggled to maintain control over the eastern territories. The Seleucid Empire found Afghanistan distant, difficult, and expensive. Eventually, Greek settlers in Bactria broke away entirely, creating the Greco-Bactrian Kingdom, a wealthy cosmopolitan state that thrived not through territorial expansion, but through trade. Goods flowed through Afghan cities from China, India, Persia, and the Mediterranean world. Ideas moved alongside them: Greek art, Iranian governance, Indian religion. Buddhism flourished here not because Afghanistan was isolated, but because it was connected. Yet connection is a double-edged sword. As trade wealth grew, so did vulnerability. Nomadic confederations from the Eurasian steppe, Scythians, Yuezhi, and others, pushed southward. They were not interested in administration or cultural preservation. They wanted access. Access to land, access to trade routes, access to power. The Kushan Empire emerged from this chaos, transforming Afghanistan once again into a global hub. Under the Kushans, Buddhism spread eastward into China, carried by merchants and missionaries traveling through Afghan corridors. For a brief moment in history, Afghanistan was not a battlefield. It was the center of the world's exchange system. But that system could not survive permanent pressure from every direction. As Rome and Parthia clashed in the west, and Chinese dynasties consolidated power in the east, Afghanistan remained caught between forces far larger than itself. The region became less a participant in global systems and more a buffer zone, a place where empires collided without fully absorbing the cost. And buffer zones suffer the most. This shift marked the beginning of Afghanistan's long transformation from crossroads to battleground, not because its people failed to adapt, but because its location made neutrality impossible. The land that once connected civilizations was slowly turning into a fault line between them, and fault lines always break first. If Afghanistan teaches us anything, it is this: empires do not fail there because they are weak. They fail because holding Afghanistan offers no stable equilibrium. When the Sasanian Persian Empire replaced the Parthians in the 3rd century CE, they attempted something new. Rather than direct micromanagement, they ruled Afghanistan loosely, allowing local elites to govern as long as taxes flowed and military manpower was available. It worked, briefly. But as Persian power waned, Afghanistan became vulnerable again to nomadic incursions. Each wave followed a familiar pattern: invasion, settlement, cultural assimilation, and eventual fragmentation. The Hephthalites, the Kittites, each adopted local customs, languages, and religions, and each eventually fell. This constant cycle created something unusual: resilience without unity. By the time Arab-Muslim armies arrived in the 7th century, Afghanistan was religiously diverse but politically fragmented. Buddhism remained strong. Zoroastrianism persisted. Hindu polities survived in the east. Kabul itself remained independent for centuries after much of the region had fallen to Islamic rule. Why? Because Afghanistan was never fully conquered, only partially controlled. When Arab armies withdrew, local traditions reasserted themselves. Islam spread slowly, unevenly, often promoted by local dynasties rather than imposed by foreign conquerors. True consolidation came not through invasion, but through local power. The Saffarids, the Samanids, and later the Ghaznavids used Islam not only as faith, but as administrative glue. Persian culture became the dominant elite language. Turkic military slaves rose through the ranks and eventually overthrew their masters. Then came the Mongols. If geography made Afghanistan valuable, Mongol strategy made it expendable. Cities that resisted were annihilated. Entire populations were erased. Trade networks collapsed. The region entered one of its darkest periods, not because of misrule, but because it lay directly in the path of Mongol expansion. Yet even devastation did not end Afghanistan's importance. Timur, known in the West as Tamerlane, used Afghanistan as a base of operations. His empire again centered trade through Afghan cities, especially Herat, which became a major cultural capital of the Islamic world. But Timur's successors fell into internal conflict, and once again, Afghanistan fractured into zones of influence controlled by Persians, Uzbeks, and Indian powers. By the 17th century, Afghanistan had become something new, a buffer state. Between Safavid Persia and Mughal India, Afghanistan was left semi-autonomous, not because either empire valued Afghan sovereignty, but because neither wanted the other to control it. This is a recurring theme in Afghan history: survival through neglect. The modern Afghan state emerged only when local Pashtun leaders, particularly Ahmad Shah Durrani, consolidated power in the mid-18th century. His empire briefly restored Afghanistan as a regional force, extending influence deep into India. But global economics had shifted. Maritime trade replaced land routes. European empires dominated the seas. Afghanistan was bypassed. Isolation followed. Ironically, this isolation allowed Afghan identity to solidify. Sunni Islam became dominant. Tribal differences mattered less than resistance to foreign domination. When Britain and Russia began their great game in the 19th century, Afghanistan once again found itself in the worst possible position between two expanding empires. Britain invaded, Britain retreated, Britain returned. Each time, the cost was enormous. Afghanistan was never colonized in the traditional sense, but it paid for imperial paranoia with blood. The 20th century promised something new: modernization without conquest. Afghanistan became a kingdom. Education expanded. Infrastructure slowly developed. For a moment, it appeared possible that the country might escape its historical curse. But geopolitics had evolved, and Afghanistan's position remained unchanged. When the Cold War arrived, Afghanistan again became valuable, not for what it produced, but for where it stood. Both the United States and the Soviet Union poured aid into the country, attempting to pull it into their respective spheres. Modernization accelerated, but unevenly. Traditional structures remained strong. Reform without legitimacy bred resistance. In 1978, a communist coup shattered the balance. Radical reforms collided violently with Afghan society. Insurrection spread. The Soviet Union intervened. What followed was not just a war. It was a systemic collapse. Millions fled. Infrastructure disintegrated. Authority fragmented. When the Soviets withdrew, Afghanistan did not recover. It fractured further. Warlords filled the vacuum. Then came the Taliban, offering order, not prosperity. After 2001, the United States attempted something no empire before had fully tried: rebuilding Afghanistan into a centralized nation-state aligned with Western political norms. It failed, not because of insufficient resources, but because history cannot be overwritten by force. Afghanistan is not weak because it lacks institutions. It is unstable because its geography ensures permanent external interest. As long as global powers exist, Afghanistan will remain relevant. And as long as it remains relevant, it will remain contested. The tragedy of Afghanistan is not endless war. It is endless importance. Empires do not come to Afghanistan by accident, and they do not leave unchanged.